Okay, great. So I guess we can start. I hope you can all hear me well. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on traceability across circular value chains, how to unlock its potential and mitigate challenges. My name is Vasilos Rizos. I'm head of sustainable resources and circular economy at CEPS, and I will be the moderator of this discussion. Let me just start by saying that in both the academic and the policy discourse, improving transparency across supply chains is often emphasized, is also brought up as a key potential driver for boosting circular economy practices. And this discussion on transparency and implementing traceability across of information across supply chains is also very hot at the moment due to the proposal of the European Commission for a new battery regulation, which aims to establish an electronic exchange system and a battery passport that will enable users to access key information about the batteries, such as battery composition, performance of the battery, and carbon footprint, among others. Now, in view of the battery's proposals, I should say that there is a range of different pieces of information that in the literature are often considered as essential to be traced across supply chains. And this can include, for example, information about materials and products, origins of products and components, flows of products across supply chains, substances, environmental performance, CO2 footprint, and the list can be longer. So it will be very interesting to hear later from the speakers from which of these information streams there are already tools available. So Circ for Life is a 3-year project financed through the Horizon 2020 funding mechanism, which aims to develop and demonstrate circular economy business models in 2 value chains, the electronics and the agri-food value chain. And among the various things that this project aspired to achieve was a traceability mechanism and a mobile phone application to allow users to access information about the products. So you will hear about these things, more detail about these applications later. And for this webinar today, we try to bring together a panel of experts from both the projects and also from other organizations in order to have a discussion, a debate about, first of all, which are the available traceability solutions that are already being used by companies and customers. What are the challenges, of course, in implementing such solutions for different product groups, which can be different depending on the specific product or value chain. The lesson that we can share, of course, from the Circ for Life project, and of course, the policies or the policy mix that is required to further boost such solutions for circular economy business models. Now, this webinar is organized in the context of the Circ for Life project and is also a partner event for the EU Green Week 2021. And hopefully the discussion today will make a small contribution to the overall theme of the Green Week, which is zero pollution. I should also not forget to say that the event is live streamed at this moment at our YouTube channel and will also be made available later on the channel in case you would like to go back to any of the points raised. A few words about the speakers, and we will start with Maria Teresa Pisani, who is an economic policy officer at the Economic Cooperation and Trade Division of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, where she leads the work on policies and standards for sustainable circular value chains. We will then continue with our first speaker from Circ for Life, Sebastian Smitner, who is head of technologies at the European EPC Competence Center. And previously he has worked on algorithm and software development. He has also a PhD at the University of Cologne. Then we will have the perspective of a recycler of waste electrical and electronic equipment. And we have with us Marieta Rieta Arabuena from Indu Metal Recycling in Spain, which is the company is also a Circ for Life partner. And Maider is responsible for European projects in the innovation department of the company and has 15 years of experience in different areas of recycling, sustainability, evaluation of waste treatment options, and LCA of products. We will close the round of speaker contributions with Caroline Langford, who is client partner at Circulor. Circulor is a company which implements traceability solutions across different supply chains, as you will hear later. Caroline joined the company in early 2020 and is currently co-leading the German team. Her focus is on the automotive sector and specifically on electric vehicle batteries, so I'm sure she will have some insights to share later regarding the battery regulation proposal. Now, the structure of this discussion is rather simple and straightforward, I would say. We will start with 10-minute contributions by all 4 panelists, and then we will move on to discussion. Now, I guess by now you are all familiar with the Q&A function of Zoom, so please use it throughout the webinar to share your questions. Feel free to also mention the organizations where you come from or the institution, and we will try to bring all of this information in the discussion. Finally, if you would like to tweet about the event, feel free to tag the project account @Circ4L and the CEPS account @CEPS_think tank in order to reshare your tweets. Now I would like to, with no further delay, to give the floor to Maria Teresa Pisani. Maria, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for being with us today, first of all, and taking the time to present your work. I think you are doing targeted work at the Commission on Traceability, so we look forward to your insights.
Thank you very much, Vasilios. First of all, for the kind introduction, and then for the invitation to contribute to this important discussion led by SEPS today. So let me share my screen. I hope you can see my presentation, and then full screen, right?
Good.
Yeah, excellent. So I will focus the presentation on highlights from an ongoing UNECE project, a project at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe that aims at providing solutions to the industry to advance traceability and transparency as key enablers for sustainability and circularity in the garment and footwear industry. So focus is the garment and footwear industry. It's a project jointly implemented with the International Trade Center and with support of the European Union Commission DG INTPA. Now, this is, well, why the garment and footwear industry, first of all? Because it is actually an industry, a priority industry that, you know, features complex global value chains, fragmented with facilities scattered all over the world. And at the same time, is an industry that we all know has high environmental, social, health and safety impacts, and an industry that has a value chain where there is very little visibility around where these environmental, social, health and safety impacts are happening. So that's why traceability, transparency of the value chains are emerging as key priorities and as an important enabler to advance sustainability and circularity. What are the key drivers here? And let me underline them because it's very important to understand what is driving actually action for traceability and transparency. First of all, I would say consumers. Consumers increasing demand for sustainable products. I mean, there are many reports and research which highlights that more than 70% of consumers are interested to make more responsible choices and are interested even to pay more for sustainable products. The problem is that actually they do not trust the information they get about the who, the where, and how made their clothes. The second driver is civil society, investors, and regulators raising attention to the credibility of sustainability claims for products, for their parts, and for raw materials put forward by the industry. Therefore, there is an increasing body of policy and legislation at the global, at the EU, at national level that puts the emphasis on the importance of more transparency and traceability in this industry. At the EU level, Vasilios, you just mentioned about the EU working on legislation to advance human rights and environmental due diligence, legislation for non-financial reporting, covering, among others, the garment and footwear industry, the EU action plan on circular economy that also targets this sector, or the EU strategy on textile. At national level, let me mention among various, I mean, the example of France that has just passed legislation for a circular economy for mandatory due diligence across the entire value chain, specifically in the garment and footwear sector. So definitely there is an increasing role for regulators since voluntary initiatives at the industry level certainly have proved insufficient to move the process forward. Third aspect, very important to underline, is actually that information to support responsible choices and to support responsible claims is actually available along the value chain. The problem is that it's somehow segregated in silos that are not connected and is coded in different ways and does not flow among the actors in the value chain. And the industry itself is well aware that there is an issue of reputational risk, that there is a need actually to improve this visibility and understanding of where the impacts are happening, and to have, let's say, an harmonized and standardized approach for the exchange of data and information. That actually goes as much as possible to the upstream part of the value chain at the level of raw material production and processing. And this is where we see a big bottleneck at the moment, really the connection between the manufacturing segment and the raw material production and processing segment in the value chain of this industry. The cotton farmers, the leather hides and skins producers, they do not really talk to the manufacturers, brands, and retailers. So traceability and transparency of value chains it has become key really to make this connection and actually involve coordinated action, I would say, at the policy and at the business level, with an important role played by technology and innovation. So certainly these three levels, the policy level, the business level, and the technology innovation level dimension, all play a very important role, and they need to come together. So at UNECE, now we have just produced a toolbox, including policy recommendation, implementation guidelines, an information exchange standard with wide engagement of industry actors. I mean, we have launched this project back in 2019. It's a 3 years project. And as part of the project, we have come up with this toolbox that includes policy recommendation guidelines, information exchange standards. And now we are piloting all this in a blockchain environment because blockchain, as I will mention, let's say, play a very important role when it comes to supporting exchange of data and information and supporting, let's say, the trusted disclosure and verification of the reliability of data and information. Now, if we stay at the policy level, in the policy recommendation, the recommendation 46, that the working party, because all the project is supported by an intergovernmental process. We have this experts group that have contributed to the development of the toolbox, but we have an intergovernmental process. We have member states that in the end have adopted the toolbox. So the policy recommendation 46 includes a set of measures that we believe, I mean, that the working party, UNECE, believes that it's important actually are taken at government policy making level. And this pertains 5 sets of measures that I will summarize very briefly. So first of all, the importance for policy coherence at international, regional, and national level. We have seen action happening at these 3 levels. It's very important that there is coherence there. So to establish this level playing field that the industry is demanding, and legal certainty, we need to get a clear understanding of, let's say, the minimum set of data and information to trace and make transparent sustainability performance for products, for processes, and for facilities along the entire value chain. Origin, CO2 emissions, use of hazardous chemicals, compliance with fundamental human rights and labor standards, health and safety requirements. This minimum set of data is defined in our toolbox, where we have this now business and data model that is defined and adopted, and a step-by-step approach where it is defined how basically companies should formulate their claim, identify the asset to be traced, and then identify the data and information that they need to exchange with the main actors along the value chain, really I mean, through the whole spectrum of business processes. Second is the importance of incentives, financial and non-financial, sustainable procurement, VAT reduction, fast-tracking processes are all types of incentives that should be taken into account. Research and development for innovation and innovation, support to innovation are very important there for sustainable material, for recycling, reusing, redesigning, let's say solutions. Fourth is awareness and education. Informed choices need actually awareness, education. There is an important skills gap and digital gap, especially at the level of SMEs. So the capacity building plays a very important role there, especially for actors in producing emerging economies. And finally, as I said, since a coordinated approach is necessary, multi-stakeholder collaborative initiatives that establish these public-private partnerships are very important there. Now, when it comes to the role of advanced technologies like blockchain, as part of the project, we have launched 2 pilots for the cotton and for the leather value chain that really have onboarded representatives of all the main actors along the value chain, from brands, retailers, to manufacturers, to farmers, raw material producers, the service providers like standard and certification bodies, technology solution providers, because we had a Swiss university that was contracted to develop the blockchain platform, which is now operational. And we have also startups like a DNA marker provider that is going to support, let's say, the physical tracking of the materials and the products as they move along the value chain. So the DNA marker sprayed on the cotton at the field level to keep track of the cotton as it moves along the value chain, and this connection between certificates, documents, and the physical asset, the cotton itself. So here you have an overview of the value chain stages covered in the blockchain pilot and all the actors involved. What are the key lessons learned? And I will conclude with this. Really, I would say that commitment and collaboration of all the stakeholders in the value chain is fundamental. And this is the biggest challenge we have been facing when practically applying our approach and standard in a blockchain environment. Brands and let's say manufacturers involved didn't have that visibility along the value chain, and getting, to collaborate and engage with actors and partners has been challenging. The other important point is to ensure that any solutions and tools are open source, are inclusive, and the capacity building component is in there, because SMEs that are most of this industry have a challenge there and they need training and capacity building. Policymakers and regulators have a role to play to create this necessary ecosystem for engaging all the stakeholders, to facilitate interoperability between the various solutions there, to develop the necessary supporting frameworks for data privacy and security, standards for data privacy and security. That is another important aspect and challenge we are facing right now. And then to adopt a common data model for standardized information exchange, such as the UNECE business standard for traceability and transparency, which is a UN now global standard for traceability and transparency, just adopted and issued. So thank you for your attention. More information about the project, including the tools, is available on the project website. And now we have launched the Sustainability Pledge, a call to action to call on industry actors to commit on specific actions to implement the approach and the standard developed by UNECE. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria Teresa, for giving us this overview of your work that you have been doing at the gourmet industry. Now, I have a few questions and target questions on how these lessons could be applied to other supply chains. And the discussion right now in Europe is very much focused on different supply chains and textiles as well, I would say, because we expanded the textile strategy. We might come back to this issue later. Now we'll move to Sebastian Schmidtner. Sebastian, first of all, thank you for being with us today. Check for Life, I would say, has kept you and us busy the past 3 years with implementing, I mean, precisely you, implementing a traceability solution or developing a traceability solution for circular economy business models. And I think this is a very good moment for the project to present what we have achieved since the debate is heating up on traceability and transparency. So what lessons can you share from the project, but also from the overall work that you have been doing since years ago on traceability?
Yeah, many thanks for the introduction, Vasilios. Indeed, Sebastian Schmidtner from ECC. Many thanks for the opportunity to speak here. We are a small subsidiary of GS1 Germany, which is a big standardization organization, DHL, which is a big logistics company, and Metro Group, which is a big retailer. And from the beginning, we do track and trace, starting more than 15 years ago with RFID technology, R&D, and nowadays we are mostly focused on traceability software development. So we have some experience in this field from inside and also beyond Circ for Life. What we've implemented in Circ for Life is an extension to the GS1 traceability standard EPCIS, which allows to not only track what's happening to products throughout the value chains, but which also now allows to track impacts associated with certain process steps. This way, we can have a transparency for where impacts mostly occur, not only in a snapshot view, doing an analysis once, maybe identifying a hotspot and then improving the system, but if you really implement continuous traceability, and if you keep monitoring, if a producer keeps monitoring processes, you can implement continuous improvements, which we think is very important. And to this end, an impact assessment tool was developed in Circ for Life, which can use the dynamic information, which is really measured from the processes as far as possible, of course, and then enriched with averages to get an overall figure to monitor what's really going on in the production processes. We think that tracking these kind of impacts is not only interesting for the producers, but can also be communicated to end consumers. To this end, the focus was not on creating just yet another label, but to enrich traceability information, which is, for example, in the FMCG sector, often already present. So for example, in many yogurt cups, you can find a QR code, which you can scan today and see like where was the yogurt produced, where are the cows living, and so on. So creating this kind of transparency for how a product was made to the end consumer through traceability is a very good step, and enriching this with information about the impacts which are associated with various product steps can enable consumers to make a much more informed buying decision. And we think that using traceability in this way is a great step forward in comparison to just doing a static analysis for example, a CO2 footprint, which mostly is based on average data and on estimates. In our setting, we actually take the measured data and product-specific data into account, which means that the figure in the end will be much more accurate and hence also more trustworthy. And it will even be product-specific. So for example, buying apples in the supermarket in spring might have a very different impact than buying apples in autumn. And this can be taken into account if you calculate, for example, such a footprint and, for example, display it in a understandable way to the end consumer in such a label as we have developed in Circ for Life. In general, we found out that the information from the production of the product is very important for recycling, and often nowadays there's quite a gap. So we've heard before that maybe there are gaps today for transmitting data in the supply chain during production, from materials to producers, for example. But then, of course, I mean, compared to that, there's a huge black hole in the middle when you sell products, and then at some point they return. So in Circular Life, we have been looking at the complex products, electronics, for example, which are made from many components. Components have subcomponents, and then lots of different materials go into there. And if you want to recycle something very complex, well, it's difficult. What mostly happens is that you either downcycle. That's what usually happens to plastics. So you don't get pure raw materials, but you get something which, well, you don't really know what's in these recycled material streams, which means that you can use the plastics for, well, making some brown bags or something, but not really use them as high quality materials in the really recycling them. The picture changes if you have this information available. So if you manage to transmit the traceability information and like what is the project made of all the way into recycling, then you can do a whole lot of things. So for example, you can exchange broken parts. If you know what parts you need to exchange, for example, the screen of a mobile phone or the battery, you could even repair and refurbish. And I think maybe Maida will also mention a little bit more about what we did in Circular Life in this direction. You can also disassemble, and you know what kind of parts you can extract, which might be more long-lived than the overall product. So, for example, the case or the sensor of a camera might be much more long-lived than the battery. And in particular, you can extract pure fractions. So the stuff that you're actually recycling, you can, if you know what materials are in there, there's a chance that it's possible and might even be economically feasible to really extract. For example, you might have heard the story of like gold from the microelectronics. In particular for plastics, this is a very relevant story. This is an overview of a system that we've implemented in Circular Life. So don't worry, I will not go into all the details of what's happening here. A more simplified view of this picture looks like this. So essentially, we are tracking tablets, or in more general electronics, beyond the end of life. So that's kind of a new idea, that you extend the traceability of a product beyond not only the point of sales, as we also did in a very nice project for leasing lighting, industrial lighting lamps, where you can track throughout the lifetime. And here we even went after the end of life, and we tracked what's happening to broken electronics, which an end user returns. Because in particular for electronics, turns out that return rates are quite low. I mean, if you want to get high recycling rates, the first thing is you need to get higher return rates. So you need to get the broken phones and tablets back instead of people just keeping them somewhere in the basement. So, here it turned out to be important that we create transparency also in this part of the value cycle. So the end user, if we can really convince the end user through transparency that the tablet is, for example, repaired, refurbished, and put to a nice second life in a school or somewhere, or that it's, well, at least properly recycled and not put to landfill or something, that's a huge step. So because that's a concern that people have. So people don't want to throw the electronics just into the bin, which is good. They want to get it properly recycled. We also implemented a reward system. Also there you need traceability, like who recycled what, and reward them properly. But turns out people are more incentivized by the good thing that they are doing by recycling. They even donate the monetary rewards for, say, tree planting rather than keeping them for themselves. So traceability also in the recycling part of the value cycle has been implemented in Circular Life and turns out to be quite important. Another interesting project I'd like to mention, which goes beyond Circular Life, is that we're currently involved in. This is a non-funded project with a couple of industry partners, which you can see on the lower left. This is exactly about this plastic recycling story. So the idea is that if you somehow manage to get the information about what is in the product, so this so-called material passport, what kind of materials went into this plastic packaging, for example. If you get this information across the value chain all the way to the end, to the recycler via, for example, here's some marking technology. You put some labels into the plastic. QR codes are shown here for an example. You can have other markings which may not be visible. But anyway, you have some marking on the plastics, and then during recycling, you can automatically sort the plastics if you recognize such a label and you know what's in there, and get much cleaner and much get a pure sort of fractions stream of secondary raw materials from the recycling, given that such a material passport exists. So that's what we are currently working on beyond Circ4Life in an industry project to make this reality. And let me finally mention a couple of points regarding well, politics, regulatory facts. We have a lot of traceability projects, and those which actually make it into reality are typically driven by regulations. So there is the tobacco sector, pharmaceuticals, meat and fish. For all those products, traceability is enforced by regulation. So our software is actually out there in the real world being used to track, for example, which fish was caught how and where, because there's a regulation which says that industry has to track this information. And Vasilius already mentioned the recycling regulations around batteries. We think that's very important. In general, compulsory recycling rates tend to be very, very helpful, because that's ultimately the figure that we want to increase. We think that a material passport could also be a very good idea. So something like we're now doing for plastics, you can imagine doing exactly the same in the garment industry, for example, for textiles. If you know what's in the material that you want to recycle, it obviously makes recycling much easier. So having such a material passport and enforcing that it really makes the way all to the recycler could greatly increase circularity of many supply chains in different sectors. Many thanks.
Sebastian, thanks very much. And first of all, there are already some questions popping up in the Q&A function. So both you and Maria Teresa, you can already start getting prepared. I will try to bring some of these questions later. So Sebastian, I think quite a few interesting policy lessons in the end, and I think I will come back to some of them later. The work you are doing is from the perspective in Circ4Life, is from the perspective of a developer of traceability solutions. So now we will move on to a user of traceability solutions, and we have with us Maidera Rieta Rabuenya, who is from Into Metal Recycling, and they use the traceability module developed by you basically. And we would like to hear, Maidera, your perspective. First of all, your work at Circ4Life, what have you achieved? Which were the challenges? I mean, what worked for you in terms of traceability? How useful you found it? And any lessons learned for the future, of course, from your side as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. So I hope you can see it. Yes?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank FEPS and especially Vasilius for offering Into Metal Recycling the opportunity to be here, sharing our experience. My name is Maidera Rieta Rabuenya. I'm here on behalf of the company responsible of the European projects and responsible of the Circ4Life project. Into Metal Recycling is a company specialized in the integrated management of e-waste and complex scrap, including logistics service and the dismantling of industrial facilities. We are a young company with a long tradition. Into Metal was established first in the last 20s as a metallurgical industry. Afterwards, in the 80s, after the industrial transition, Into Metal Recycling is set up to provide environmental solutions. At present, the company is market leader in Spain, and it has the WELABEX certification, which represents the international recognition of excellence in the treatment of different types of waste, electrical and electronic equipment. After this brief presentation of the company and focusing on today's discussion, I invite you to have a look at our sector, the electrical and electronic one. We can quickly realize what evolution has meant in terms of consumption. However, with increasing use of and production of electronic devices, the amount of e-waste are also increasing globally. According to the United Nations report, the total production of e-waste worldwide is around 50 million tons annually, while the recycling of e-waste is less than 20%. Currently, a lack of visibility regarding e-waste flows and their sustainability impact can limit opportunities for a circular economy. Which are the main challenges and the needed policies to further foster solutions for circular economy business models? For sure, celebrating these transitions relies on the uptake of innovative new business models and disruptive technological innovation. Indumetal knows the importance of the innovation, and this is just an example of how we support it. These are the current European projects on which we are participating. However, during this presentation, as Vasilios has mentioned, I would like to show you more in detail the Seed for Life project, the results achieved for the moment, and how traceability issues have arisen. Very briefly, Seed for Life project is focused on the development and implementation of a circular economy approach for sustainable products and service through their value chain and supply chain. Focusing on our work in the metal recycling as we recycler together with Reciclia as environmental platform, we have been responsible of the demonstration of these new circular business models applied to tablets. We have carried out this demonstration in Getxo, a city close to Bilbao in the Basque Country. The main objectives of this demo have been, first, to come to the surface a wave flow known as hidden treasure in order to increase collection ratio, to better sort them, and with that, to improve the waste quality when it arrives to the recycling plant. Currently, this e-waste flow is kept at home, since either the consumer doesn't know where to dispose it, or he has an emotional link to the waste, or simply because there are small devices that don't take up space at home. Secondly, to link the end user with the waste that he or she is disposing. Third, to motivate the end user for the recycling action, taking into account also the quality of the waste. And finally, to encourage the awareness raising of the end users towards an environmental sustainability and circular economy. How have we achieved these objectives? Well, Seed for Life project has linked the end user with the waste with the recycling company, and finally, the recycling company with the end user again. For that, we have proposed a new collection system based on, first, 2 intelligent bins, which are being used now by citizens and by students from primary schools to dispose their electronic waste. And secondly, a mobile app, which let the end users not only interact with intelligent bins, but also check the end of life of their waste, see the reward obtained by their recycling actions, and redeem it by incentives. For that, Seed for Life project has developed the following traceability tools. A QR code for operating with the intelligent bin, identifying the end users when they dispose a waste. A barcode generated by the intelligent bin that is stuck on the waste to be disposed, linking in this way the waste with the end user. A traceability module used by the recycling company for scanning the barcode and checking the quality of the waste. And finally, a QR code used by the end users to get the incentives. But what do the end users obtain? Well, as I have mentioned before, they are rewarded by their recycling action. With what? Well, they receive a certain number of eco-credits by each disposed waste, depending on if the waste works, can be remanufactured, or simply is recycled, information that is provided by the recycling company during the assessment of the waste. And with these eco-credits, what can the end users do? Well, they have two different options. The first one is to redeem the obtained eco-credits by discount in a local shop. And the second option is a more sustainable, environmental friendly one. They can donate the eco-credits for tree planting in Ghetto. After 6 months of demo in Ghetto, we can highlight that we have received a great interest from the main stakeholders involved in the demo, such as the collective schemes, the public administrations, the recyclers, schools, citizens, households, appliance shops, or companies with environmental awareness. Regarding the end users, there is a need of increasing their knowledge about this flow and its recycling process. Moreover, a range of people, mainly elderly people, have shown certain reservations towards the use of a mobile app. Regarding the bin, we can conclude that its location presents limitations due to the size and the need of electricity grid. And finally, as a recycling company, we have detected that this collection system involves a high labor cost for us, due mainly to these reasons. The first one, the need of emptying the bin frequently, since the end user is waiting for the reward. It's not acceptable to do it only once per month, because this will imply around a month and a half for receiving the eco-credits, and this could discourage the end users. And the second reason is the scanning and the assessment of each device, since it's done one by one. In addition to these preliminary conclusions, it's important to remark the novelty of this collection system. Thanks to it, an important progress has been achieved in the sorting and the quality of this flow, which turned into a more reliable collection system for the end users. The possibility of remanufacturing some of the collected devices, and of course, more participation of the end users thanks to the incentives. But after all, which are the main challenges to be faced? We have identified 3 different groups of challenge, the economic ones. In this respect, we should try to answer these questions. How can this collection system be financed? Who will support this business model? Is it suitable for all the e-waste or just for a specific electronic devices? How could the labor cost be reduced in the recycling plants? How will the incentivizers be engaged? From a technological point of view, the main challenge are to improve the app and the design of the bin, and to simplify the process for the end users, for example, avoiding 2 different QR codes or making easier the eco-credits redeem. And finally, the main social challenge are to involve the end users, making them a key role in the value chain, to promote the sustainable consumption, and of course, how to scale to other regions. And that's all from my side. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, my dear, for your perspectives, and I think you raised some interesting points in the end. Who's going to take up the cost of implementing such a full traceability solutions? And I guess that can raise some questions or discussions in the future. Now I'd like to move to the last speaker for today, Caroline Langfeld. Caroline, first of all, thank you for your time today. Thank you for being with us. And from my understanding, Circular is offering a platform for enabling traceability in different supply chains. So you will have insights to share from different product groups. So we're looking forward to hear your views and also your perspectives. What kind of policy mix you think is required to further boost solutions like the ones that you have produced?
Okay, fantastic. And thank you for the nice introduction, Vasileios. And thank you for having me here. I'm very happy about that. Let me share my screen and dive right into it. You should be seeing my screen now, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fantastic. Well, as I said, my name is Caroline Langfeld. I work for Circular. I'm client partner and focuses on strategic development. And I'm speaking to you today from Berlin. Our headquarters is in London, but we also have entities in Berlin, as well as in North America and Singapore. And yeah, we are a tech company. We provide a software solution that enables customers to track the flow of goods through supply chains to demonstrate responsible sourcing and support climate neutrality objectives. And we were founded in 2017, and so we are a fairly young company. And here you see some of our major milestones. So we started in 2018, first mine to manufacture blockchain, which is our proof of concept, which was actually with tantalum coming from Rwanda. And then in 2019, we started working with our first customer, which was Volvo Cars. And since then, we are tracking and tracing for Volvo Cobalt from the mines in the DRC all the way to their first fully electric vehicle, which is the XT40. And we added other materials because Volvo wants to achieve 100% traceability and transparency. So cobalt, but we're also tracing mica for them, nickel, and since 2021, lithium. And another very interesting milestone was 2020, when we achieved the first dynamic carbon tracking in auto supply chain. That's something we are doing together with our client Daimler. So Daimler has the goal to achieve or to produce a climate neutral new car fleet by 2039, which is of course a fantastic objective. But also there's a lot of challenges, as we all know. The main scope 3 CO2 emissions are hidden in the supply chain. So we shed light on that to enable Daimler to have a more informed conversation with their supply chain participants. Yeah, I already mentioned Volvo, Daimler. Here you can see a few more of our clients. We have a strong focus on the automotive sector. So next to Volvo and Daimler, we also work with Jaguar Land Rover, and we have many midstream and upstream suppliers which are in these supply chains. So you can see YU Cobalt, Chemical, as well as Vulcan Energy, which is a lithium producer who's sourcing in Germany. And I mean, our clients are very diverse. I mean, they're all from the automotive sector, but the supply chains we work with are very diverse, as you already mentioned, Basileos. And so I was talking already about mica, lithium, nickel. So basically the entire group of conflict materials which goes into the EV battery. But, and this might be interesting for you, Maria, we also have the leather traceability project. And so with Jaguar Land Rover, we are tracing their leather supply chains, which then ends up in the cars. And we also have the plastic projects going on, which are very different. One is in Southeast Asia, so looking in the informal plastic sector, while the other ones are value chains, which are only in Europe. And so we are facing different challenges here. But today I want to stick to the EV battery and to the conflict materials which go in here, because you already mentioned the EU battery regulation, Basileus, which of course is one of the most pressing topics for us at the moment. But before I come to that, I want to explain to you how we provide traceability, because that's also, yeah, there's always the big question, like, how do you do that? Like, those supply chains are very complex, and Sebastian Maria already named those markers, like DNA markers, which you bring, for example, put on the cotton, or QR codes on the plastic. Our big challenge is that we are dealing here with materials such as cobalt, for example, which in the process, like along the supply chain, changes physical and chemical composition. So you have the ore cobalt at the mine site, which then turns into cobalt hydroxide and goes through many processes, chemical processes, where you can't put a marker on the ore cobalt. So for example, the refining process. And so we have to set up a very detailed system to be able to trace those kind of materials. And what we do is we create a digital twin at the source. So we really start at the mine site, and I want to explain that. I'm going to stick to cobalt and Volvo to make it a little bit more tangible. So we start in the mine site in the DRC to trace the cobalt, and here we start building up a digital twin, which then follows the resource all the way to the final product. And this digital twin, I really like the image of the shadow, because kind of like a shadow, the digital twin mirrors every change the physical asset or the physical resource does. So every change is shown by the digital twin and then saved on the blockchain. But as everybody knows working in the blockchain space, the data you put into the system, so the data you put into the blockchain is only as valid. Is only not the blockchain makes it valid, because a lot of times people think, oh, it's blockchain technology, so it needs to be immutable, it needs to be correct. But blockchain is only the underlying technology. So you really need to make sure that the data you put on the system is correct and valid. And that's why we also work with a variety of new technologies. We have, for example, facial recognition. So starting at the mine site, we have the ability or the possibility to register every mine worker via our app, which runs on a mobile phone, to make sure that, for example, no children are working in the mine sites, and to make sure which period of time the workers are working, which then can be connected to their salary, make sure that they get a decent salary. And you can also, for example, store documents which prove they have safe work equipment, workshops, first aid, all this. So this can all be added to a single worker. And this is like the first part of the digital ID, the digital twin, which follows the resource. Then we also work, for example, with GPS sensing. And so our app, which then scans the QR code, which are attached to the cobalt bags, only works in a certain radius. And so we can make sure that not cobalt bags coming from a mine site next door, maybe only 200 meters away, are being scanned in, but only the radius we defined before. And then also the tags which are being issued by our system can only be used on a certain day by a certain group of people which have been defined before and in a certain radius. And so we put a lot of value onto the first mile, because that is where most of the human rights regulation happen. And then we follow this bag of cobalt. So then we also track transportation, like which route is the truck taking, which goes from the mine site to the refinery, let's say. And I think the refinery is the point in the supply chain that gets really interesting, because as I said, we're not tracing a banana which stays a banana from the beginning till the end, but we are tracing resources which change the chemical and physical composition. And so here we have to work then like either with segregation, so saying in the refinery Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the refinery only works for Volvo, so that we know the material which is coming in is also the material which is coming out. But what we also do is that we can encode business rules into our solution. So like a typical midstream process, for example, is 1 ton cobalt ore coming into the refinery. Then the process takes 5 days, and out come 800 kilograms of cobalt hydroxide. This is a process which always stays the same, so we can encode it into our solution. And then via machine learning, it gets automatically checked. And if any of the facts I just named deviates from the protocol, then that gets flagged as an anomaly, which is then shown in our system and reported to the facility as well as to the OEM, to our customers. And just to give you an idea, this is like the first part of the cobalt value chain. And my colleague always calls it the slide of horror. But this is how detailed we work. So at the beginning, together with our clients, we kind of define a heat map for the material in question. We define risks which are connected to the material. Also, we look at regulations, like with which facts you need to comply with, like with which details do you need, which data do you need to comply with, for example, the European battery regulation or the EU conflict material law. And then according to those risks and regulations, we install scan points all along the value chain. And these scan points help us to retrieve the data we need to minimize those risks and to make sure that companies are compliant with their regulations. And how we retrieve the data, as discussed, we're using different technologies, really depending on the material and on the station in question. And I think I need to wrap it up a little bit. So to summarize, we take a look at the material journey. We take a look at attributed CO2 emissions, because once we bring transparency into the supply chain, and once we're able to follow each individual bag of cobalt, we are also able to attach like an amount of any information we want to this bag of cobalt, and also CO2 scope 3 emission. If I have time, I can later elaborate how we do this. And in the end, the OEM or our client, we also have upstream clients, have them like a very detailed reporting and analysis tool. And I already mentioned the battery regulation at the very beginning. So the battery regulation is coming in place in 2022. We've been working on this, on end-to-end battery transparency for a few years now. And so far, like our focus lies on the first third of the circle, if you want. So like on the provenance bit, which is also defined by the EU battery regulation. But of course, like because we have the platform which collects all the data, we are also able, and we're working on it with Daimler, Volvo at the moment, as well as with another car manufacturer, also to close the gap during the life cycle management, and then to follow the material all the way through the recycling process back into life. And by this, we enable the battery passport. So basically, we developed a battery passport management system, collecting all the data which are required by the regulation, such as general information, ecological footprint, responsible sourcing. I just dived into it, like how we do it during the provenance part. Then technical parameters, dismantling safety area, as well as safety data, as well as regulatory compliance. Some of the data is static, such as the general information, while the ecological footprint, responsible sourcing is, of course, dynamic data and differs from battery to battery. And yeah, just to understand a little bit better, because I think we're going to talk about it after this, how we comply with the...
If you could conclude in 1 or 2 minutes, please. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, this is my last slide, actually. I'm not going to dive into the scope 3 emissions. Just to give you an idea, so what we provide as battery passport management system for participants in the EV battery supply chain. So we collect all the relevant data, and then at some point when the European Electronic Exchange System is set up, this data can be transmitted to the EEES. And yeah, that's it from my side.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. And I have questions, some questions myself regarding the battery, the work you're doing on batteries, because it's very specific, and I will come back to this later. So I can already see quite a few interesting questions popping up on the chat, and already some of them have been answered. But I would like to pick some of them that I think that they are very relevant for the discussion. So maybe I can start with a question for Maria Teresa from Simeon Christofilidis from the European Copper Institute, who basically raised the question of how do you ensure consistency, from what I understand, in different requirements. For example, he mentioned here the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the Digital Product Passport. So how do you ensure consistency among all of these different requirements? And if I could extend a little bit this question, Maria Teresa, for many of these supply chains, or all of them maybe, we're talking about global supply chains, and we look like a range of initiatives that are now are emerging pretty much everywhere. So how do you see the market in the future? How can we ensure consistency in all of these initiatives, some of them industry-led, others required by legislation, and who should take the coordinating role to ensure some level of consistency at least? While I let you 2 minutes to think about it, I will present some questions for the other speakers for them to start preparing. So for Sebastian and Caroline, I would say that we heard a lot regarding the data privacy concerns. And I was curious to see how do you actually, in the successful cases that you have, how do you actually ensure that all of the actors along the supply chain agree to share the data? I mean, is it like that you have to get agreement for every piece of the chain, let's say? And what if you miss one piece of the chain? And Sebastian, you mentioned the regulatory examples, but I guess for many of these supply chains, there are no regulatory framework, but you have managed to achieve it somehow in the past. So how do you manage to achieve it? Where do you see the big challenges? And how do you think they could be addressed? And another related questions to data privacy concerns also goes to MyDare, because I know you receive electronic devices MyDare, and there's a lot of there are many concerns regarding the data in this device. So what does Indumetal Recycling do to address these concerns by users regarding what's going to happen with the data? I mean, insert for life, but also beyond. So maybe I start with you, Maria Teresa. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much for the good questions, very pertinent. So on the issue of consistency, it's actually a must and a very important requirement that has been put forward by the industry and by the many member states that right now are working on due diligence and advancing sustainability, circularity in value chains in many industries, not only garment and footwear. I mean, but there are many sectors: agri-food, IT waste, automotive, that are, I mean, priority sectors for the circular economy, as we saw in the EU Circular Economy Action Plan. So this question of consistency and coordination at the national, regional, and global level, certainly very high on the agenda. When it comes at the EU level, there are many DGs that are leading different initiatives and legislative work. The DG Justice, the DG Growth, the DG Environment, the DG INTPA on the development cooperation side. And as far as I know, the European Commission has established internal mechanism to ensure that coordination and to ensure, synergies and complementarities and avoid, any contradicting provisions in all these policy regulatory initiatives. So internal coordination at the Commission level, at the EU level, is certainly happening. I'm participating in many internal roundtables, but also events where all these DGs are exchanging and liaising. There is at the OECD level as well. I mean, this is happening at the global level in EU platform and roundtables. So definitely, I mean, very important to have neutral platforms, I would say, to bring to lead and to push this coordination. When it comes to the involvement of upstream countries, I mean, producing countries, I think this is also very important because, okay, the EU can take policy, regulatory, legislative initiative, but a lot of these sectors do have global and complex value chains. So involvement of the producing countries in the upstream part of the value chain is essential. And there I see development cooperation, but also other instruments like trade agreements, for instance, as important instruments that can be used to ensure that alignment and that coordination also outside the EU. And then I think you asked the question at the beginning on the applicability of our approach and standard to other sectors. I think for traceability and transparency, a lot of the principles and the approaches are relevant across sectors. There are specificities when it comes to environmental, social, health and safety hotspots and risks for this industry, but otherwise, for doing traceability and transparency, there are definitely common requirements when it comes to how you define your sustainability claims, when it comes to how you identify your assets, when it comes to how you identify data and documents and key actors along the value chain that need to be involved. So, I mean, a lot of the aspects of the standard and the approach definitely are replicable. We are looking into that and already working with our member states to have a team of specialists working on traceability and transparency of sustainable and circular value chains cross industry. Yeah.
Thank you, Maria Teresa. Well, maybe we move to Sebastian.
Yeah, hey, Vasilios, that's your question of like, why should companies actually share data? That's a key question in all these traceability stories, because consulting companies have been touring up and down the country for years and telling everybody that, look, your data is your most valuable asset. And actually, I mean, often you can derive business relevant information from even tiny bits of data that you're sharing. So you definitely do not want to publicly put all information about all your processes to the internet, for sure. So it's always a very delicate question of how to make these traceabilities cross-company work. I mean, inside a company is one thing, so you want to know what's going on within your company, that's clear, but sharing information across companies is always very delicate. And there has been a lot of work on this, and there's still ongoing work in a lot of projects. How it works in reality, in the big cases, for example, in the food industry where traceability is established, is that sharing of a certain minimal set of information is enforced. And then, well, you just pay, I mean, you can't participate in the market essentially if you don't share this part of the data. So everybody does it, and then it's sort of fair. So there's no competitive advantage of not sharing it. I mean, to the contrary, you have to pay fees, and then you're kicked out of the market. So this is one way. You force everybody to share a certain piece of data, and then people feel, okay, it's fair. Everybody's sharing that piece of data. If there's no enforced data sharing, you have to make a quite strong case that usually an economic case that there's value in sharing this data. For example, tracking pallets, just some random example. We had a nice project where we could gather a large enough group of industry partners to agree that sharing information is a good thing, because eventually you could make a good business case out of it. But that's rare, and you have to do a lot of convincing. So where it usually works, and where it works like large scale, not only for a small consortium which agrees to do this and that, but where it works really industry wide or for a whole sector, is usually through regulations. These are the big traceability cases out there in reality, because it's always a little bit the situation, the one company which steps forward and says, look, I kind of open up my database and I want to share my data, they get a disadvantage. So nobody wants to be the first or like the second or the third, and only if there's enough people sharing the data, everybody starts seeing the value. So it's a typical example of something which needs to be coordinated by politics, by regulations, by whatever. So sometimes an industry consortium which is big enough, or like just one company which has enough power in a certain market segment, manages to enforce all my suppliers to be transparent. And if I have enough power, then sometimes this also works. But yeah, in most sectors where power is well distributed and diverse, it's regulations which make the data sharing happen eventually.
Thank you, Sebastian. Caroline?
Yeah, I would totally agree with Sebastian. I mean, you can see it very clearly now with the European battery regulation. I mean, it's making the publicity of some data regulatory, and I think that really helps. And of course, you always have some pioneers like such as Volvo or Polestar who step forward with a good example, and it's just kind of demand full traceability. But I also think, just like looking at the European EV battery space in general, that there's also like kind of a shift of mindset at the moment, because you see like many gigafactories establishing themselves in the European countries, and they have basically a blank canvas to fill. So, I mean, the mobility and the European mobility transformation is taking place, and it's basically in the hand of these companies to shape, and it's also in the hand of the consumers and the constitutions to shape this new era of mobility. And I think you have many great players there, and I had like many conversations with gigafactories which say, we cannot wait for the EU battery regulation to be in place. Like, we want to enable full traceability from the very beginning on. So for example, like one of our clients, which is Vulcan Energy Resources, which is the upstream lithium producer, they go into production in 2024, but they are implementing traceability now in the supply chain, because they say And that's what we need in the mobility sector to come forward and to really produce green EV batteries in Europe.
Okay, good. Thank you, Caroline. My dear, as a company that receives the devices at the end of the supply chain, so what can you say regarding other privacy concerns?
Okay, well, the concern about the data in our case, as a recycling company, we can assure that all the devices that are going to be recycled are completely destroyed. So there is no problem with data. I have seen one question regarding the remanufacturing of some of the devices. In that case, we have a specific protocol, a procedure, which involves several steps, but one of them is, of course, the deleting and the format of the devices, the change of the battery, and updating the software. So in our case, the data are completely destroyed, disappear from the device.
Okay, good. Thank you, my dear. Now we have the privilege of having very active speakers in this webinar who are already answering some of the questions. So I'm trying. I see that for many of the questions we already have answered. So maybe I pick up some other points. And starting with Maria Teresa, I know we had a discussion before the call, and you raised quite a number of initiatives that were led by the Commission, by your Commission, and they turned into European law. So I was wondering if you can present some of these examples and lessons learned, because many people are not aware of existing traceability solutions that started as a project and then they ended up being, or some kind of a traceability, being a mandatory requirement by law. Moving to Caroline, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the question that comes from Unicorn, from Jan Tijtgaard, regarding the mass balance and whether you accept working with companies whether the companies can guarantee that all these input are responsibly sourced. So I think this is quite a technical question. I don't know if you want to take it up now or bilaterally. If I could extend this, you mentioned about the full traceability, that the solution that you offer, and I was wondering, because of course when it comes to cobalt and all of these materials, there are a lot of discussions these days. So I was wondering if you reach the point of assessing even the mining conditions, which from some reports I've seen from NGOs, this is very difficult information sometimes to retrieve. And also whether you have information on the environmental impacts of mining operations, again, something that is sometimes difficult to retrieve from what I've seen in the research at least. For Sebastian, I was wondering if you have something to say regarding the labeling aspect, and you mentioned earlier that we don't need to prepare a new label, but in the end, I mean, wasn't this like something that we did in the end to an extent? So I was wondering, presenting all of these things to consumers, I mean, is there a risk of having a confusion in the end? Or you think that this is an information that is needed? And the second question for you is that whether you think that all of this work, I mean, I understand that what you did is that we have an existing standard that you try to apply it now and check for life. So I was wondering, more concretely, did you learn any specific lessons or something that you will avoid to do in the future in another European project? And finally, for my dear, we tested some of the solutions in the intelligent bins. I know that you had some kind of demonstrations in Spain. So I was wondering if you can share some insights. How do consumers react? In all of this transparency, all of this information available to them through the mobile phone. I mean, did you see increasing, of course, a strong interest? Of course, we're talking about a very small sample some case studies that you had, but there's a lot of this. There was a lot of work conducted in this project. So I was wondering, in the end, if we can claim that the end users, the people that they use this app together in cooperation with you, they were satisfied, or you saw an increased interest in using such applications. So can I start with you, Maria Teresa?
Let me unmute myself. Thank you very much, Vasilios. And I wanted to
just to also claim, we might not have a time for another round of questions. So if you want to have any closing remarks, you can bring them together now. Yeah.
I mean, so in that regard, I want to link up first to what Sebastian said. And what we are seeing, I mean, through our project, and especially the implementation of the blockchain pilots, where we have set up consortia of companies, from the brands back to the farmers, that need to share data and documents, you know, for the traceability and transparency of the value chain. This issue of the data privacy and security is very, very challenging. We had to establish a data management rules book and memorandum of understanding with each individual company to manage the sharing of data, and definitely it's a complex aspect. So I do believe and do agree that you know, having at the regulatory level the definition of a minimum set of data and information for traceability and transparency purposes is very, very important to create that level field and the sort of you know, kind of support to those leading companies that are ready to do that sharing and disclosure. So regulation plays an important role, and I see it in the practical experience of managing consortia that are working in our blockchain pilots. Actually, and that links to your second question about in the experience of UNECE, how, I mean, standards on information exchange have been picked up and reflected in regulation, policy and regulation at the EU level. I mean, these are UN standards and have a voluntary nature. I mean, some of them without have been picked up by the industry as the main reference standard is the UN EDIFACT, for instance, which is a standard for information exchange widely used in the transport logistic industry. It's the main industry standard for information exchange in transport and logistics, but in other industries like agri-food or fishery, UNECE has done standards on information exchange like UN FLAX for the traceability of fishery value chains that have been made mandatory in EU regulation issued by the GMARE to trace fish catches in all EU member states, and have been included in bilateral trade agreements between the EU and fish exporting countries like Indonesia, Thailand, you know, mandatory for these countries in order to get the green flag, the green pass to export to the EU, to collect and provide the data on the origin of the fish catches according to our standards, and submission of this information to fishery authorities. In the agri-food, we have the rapid alert system for food safety, which has been developed jointly with the Sante, and is a mandatory standard to trace back to the origin food batches whenever there is an health and safety concern. So yeah, I mean, examples of how these kind of standards that are developed as voluntary instruments then become mandatory to provide that level playing field.
Good. Thank you, Maria Teresa. And Sebastian, I turn to you. And maybe one other question that I saw, quite a few questions actually popping up in the chat. We cannot answer all of them now, but I saw there is one question from DG Environment, from Luis Carretero, who asked that the Commission, who basically raised the point that the Commission will develop digital passports, or will be in the process of assessing the possibility of developing such passports for different product groups. So we're wondering, you, Sebastian or Caroline, if you have any views on sectors that is easier to integrate life cycle traceability. If you have any views, any comments to this environment in this regard. Sebastian, I pass it, the floor to you.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good point. And but you're asking about sectors. I mean, in Circular Life, we have been looking at the electronic sector, and obviously that's like the most complicated one you can look at. For example, if you look at plastics and plastic packaging, is a bit simpler. If you look at, well, I don't know, fresh food, for example, it gets even simpler. Essentially, you can look at the supply chain and look at how many companies are involved. So this is a very good first measure of how complicated will it be to make traceability across all these companies work, because if there's like a very good situation like we had in Circular Life, where Alia is controlling most of the production supply chain, that of course makes it much simpler to implement traceability along the whole supply chain compared to an industry where you have a tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 25 supplier, and you need to track along dozens of companies. Okay, there were a few questions. I tried to briefly answer them. In terms of labels, we think that transparency to the end consumer is very important, but of course, you have to be careful not to overload the consumer. And if there is 10 different types of labels for basically for very similar purposes, it makes it very difficult for the consumer to decide what is a trustworthy label. So we think that if you put a label, it should have a meaning. So for example, the CO2 footprint with a gauge, it has a visual meaning that you can immediately get. It is a clear figure, it's a clear statement. If it says, I don't know, ecological or whatever, organic, and then it's this and that label, and then you have to look up and find out what does it mean, and then there's 10 different organic labels, and which one does mean, and you know, there's a complexity for the end consumer. If that gets too high, you might actually not achieve anything. That's something you have to keep in mind. But we do think that creating transparency can help to really encourage more sustainable buying decisions by end consumers, because most people are aware of the problems. It's not like I don't know. It's not like people are not aware. It's just yeah. We think that you can make a case by just providing more transparency here. You were asking about the standard, so this traceability standard.
If you could do in 1 or 2 minutes, Sebastian, to have some time to. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. So we yeah. Okay. Let's not get too technical. This traceability standard is already in use across FMCG mostly. So these GS1 standards are used a lot in logistics and in FMCG. And we think extending them to also include the track and trace of impacts. And there was also a question of course, tracking more, in particular, also tracking all these impacts. This will mean some effort, some cost. Is this the right thing to do? And well, it depends. Usually for these traceability projects, you have to, in the end, you have to make a business case, right? So making your own business more transparent, making your processes more transparent in the immediate, like the low-hanging fruits are usually for the business itself, and then you go data sharing across company. And if there is a global regulation which says, look, if you don't share your data, you have to pay some penalty, that's some very obvious incentive to get traceability in place. Yeah, so if this is my last comment, many thanks for organizing this event. It was great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Caroline, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, okay. I'm going to use the last minute to answer the questions. So maybe start with a one from Jan Tuitgaard from UNECE. If we accept working with companies that don't guarantee that all their input is responsibly sourced, so it's not us who defines which companies are on the supply chain. So we work with the companies with the supply chain participants of our clients. So it's our clients who have to comply with the regulations, who have their own sustainability objectives, and we work with the supply chain participants. So like we are not, I mean, we are a tech provider, so we are also not a certifier. So what we provide is transparency, but we don't set any standards ourselves. And then there was another one, a technical question about Hyperledger, if we consider also working with other blockchain technologies. And yes, we do and we don't. So basically we are tech agnostic. We're in the very early years of blockchain technology. And we are kind of watching what is happening to blockchain technology, making sure that we stay interoperable with other solutions, with other blockchain out there, because I don't know, we can't see in the future. We don't know how it's going to look like in 10 years. And then maybe one last comment about data sharing. I mean, sorry. this is also the good thing about the blockchain is, like I think I mentioned in the beginning, that you can also define like who has access rights. And so not every data which is put on the blockchain is immediately public information, or also not shared across the entire supply chain. And because you have the possibility to share off-chain and on-chain, you can also work with, you can also be GDPR compliant. And my last word, yeah, thank you so much for having me, Vasileios, and for organizing this.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Caroline. My dear, you have the pleasure of having the last contribution from the speakers. Yeah, the privilege, I would say.
Thank you. Well, in our case, the initiative has been very well accepted by the citizen, but perhaps the best part has been the results from primary school, because as I have mentioned, we have two different intelligent beings. One of them has been installed in a public space for citizens, but the other one is has been in different primary schools. So we have had the opportunity to have training sessions with the schools, with the students from primary schools, and during 2 months, 2 and 3 months, the beam has been installed in the schools, and the result has been very, very good from them. All the students and the parents of the students have been very involved, and the kilograms of devices that we have received have been really, really important. So perhaps the best part has been the awareness in the primary schools. I think is one of the key of this kind of demonstration, and we have to promote and to continue in this way to encourage from the small one, from the child to the big one.
Okay, good. Thank you, my dear. So first of all, yeah, just a couple of closing remarks. I think we managed to gather very extremely useful, I mean, at least to me, perspectives. I hope to all of you. Very technical in some cases, but I think also very policy relevant. And certainly these discussions will continue in the future if you're looking into the legislative portfolio that is supposed to come into place during this commission cycle. I think for many of these pieces of legislation, traceability or transparency can be an important component. So I'm sure we will have opportunities to continue this debate in the future. So I would like to thank all of the 4 speakers from my side for taking the time to be here, providing your perspective. I think it was very interesting. I hope it was useful for the audience as well. It will be made available on our YouTube channel shortly, so people hope will have the opportunity to go back to some of the messages. The slides, since some people asked, will also be available on the CEPS page at some point in the coming days. I would also like to encourage you to visit certforlife.eu to learn about what the project has achieved. It will be accomplished in October, but there's still most of the, let's say, business models have already been implemented, so we have already quite a few messages to share. And there will also be a final digital event in September where we will present our project achievements and also some policy insights. So you will find some information about it on the CEPS website and on the Cert4Life website during the summer at some point. So that's all from my side. Thank you, thank all of you, and yeah, we stay in touch, I guess.
Thank you very much, Vasileios. It was a great session. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Many thanks.